We are back, and we are joined now by Michelle Eisen, national leader of Starbucks Workers United and a 15-year Starbucks barista veteran. Michelle, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, welcome back. We've had you on before, and I wanted to get a little bit of an update from you because earlier this week there was a new report from the Institute for Policy Studies that showed that the new CEO of Starbucks, Brian Niccol, made $95.8 million last year, and the median barista made $14,674. I wrote down that exact figure because that's a ratio of 6,666 to, it's a little satanic, to one, and that is the largest of the joke, largest of all S&P 500 companies, which is incredible. So just your reaction to that, as obviously the national leader of Starbucks Workers United.
Well, obviously you can't make that number up. And it is incredibly fitting given the situation that most Starbucks workers feel like they find themselves in. I think it's really important to note, you said his salary last year, he only worked for the company for 4 months last year. He was hired in September. So that's not like a 12-month salary. That's what he made in 4 months with the company. And that was 6,666 times more than the average barista made in the year, not what the average barista made in 4 months. So he made that in 4 months. The average barista made that in a year. We're not dealing with a small company. This is not a mom and pop coffee company that can't afford to pay its workers a living wage. I mean, every company should pay its workers a living wage, but we're dealing with a multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporation who can afford to pay its CEO $96 million in 4 months. Why can't it afford to pay its workers? The workers who run these stores every single day, the workers who most would say are responsible for bringing in the billions of dollars of profit that this company pulls in every year. It's sad, it's disappointing, and it's completely unnecessary. Like, there's no reason so many Starbucks baristas should rely on, federally funded medical, like this.
Right.
What is
Right.
going on here? That's just,
Well, we're subsidized. I mean, even if you want to expand it, like all of us as a country are subsidizing the poor labor practices of not just Starbucks, but you hear this about Walmart employees. You hear this about, whatever other major companies around the country. We're subsidizing corporate greed because they should be providing these things for their workers, and they have the means to. But instead, it's let's break records on CEO pay versus worker pay.
Yeah, it really is like they are out to break the worst possible records you could be out to try to break,
Yes.
which is coming from a company like Starbucks, who for decades has prided themselves on being a better company, right? Like they claim to be the first to offer the level of health benefits that they offer. They claim to be the first to offer those to part-time employees. There are a lot of things that they are out there still patting themselves on the back for. And the reality is that they are not that company anymore. What I think is, I don't know if ironic is the right word, but what is certainly laughable is that the entire sort of mantra of Brian Niccol since he stepped into this role was trying to get the company back to its roots, like trying to get back to Starbucks. That's his initiative. And yet every policy that he has rolled out since he stepped into this role just over a year ago has actually gotten us further away from that. And the way that the employees are being treated, the way that the workers who run these stores are being treated under his reign, if you will, is completely contrary to what the company has always said they prided themselves on. So it really is. We are at a point right now in the country and with this company where we're seeing this consolidation of wealth and power to this very select few. And what it is inevitably doing is causing workers to stand up and fight for what they know they deserve and what they feel like they have a right to. And it is fueling the organizing for our campaign, I think, across the country, but certainly for our campaign. We have seen organizing numbers surge since Brian Nickel took this role. We've organized an additional 155 stores. That's something like 2,600 Starbucks baristas. It's like on average, about 3 stores a week since he
Wow.
became CEO, which is these are huge numbers. And they are, in my opinion, directly correlated to the current state of the country and the fact that the policies that he has rolled out since he has stepped in have only made baristas' jobs harder.
Well, I mean, some of the government programs that I read the article from Lynn Fox, the SBWU president, and in these times, I mean, that they were speaking about how Starbucks baristas are reliant on things like SNAP and Medicaid, which are getting gutted by the Trump administration. So in terms of the urgency of what you're talking about, that makes total sense. But also, the piece outlines all of these like crazy changes that the new CEO has undertaken since taking over later last year. What have some of those changes been, and what do you feel like their role is in accelerating the drive to organize amongst the workforce?
Like I said, the policies he has rolled out under the guise of this Back to Starbucks plan have actually made baristas' jobs harder, made these cafes less habitable, I guess is maybe the best word. So a few that rolled out just within a few months of him stepping in. Starbucks kind of had this open door policy, a very community policy. I started with this company in 2010, so I know how these stores run. I know what these cafes are typically like, these lobbies are like, and you could come in, you could get a glass of water, you could use the restroom, no questions asked. This wasn't like you need to make a purchase. So in January, they rolled out this policy that essentially slammed that open door shut. And you could not come in unless you were making a purchase to use the restroom or to get a cup of water, which is really, you're putting baristas in a very, very, very tight spot, in a bad position, because they're the ones inevitably stuck with enforcing these policies that are incredibly unpopular. This isn't, we can go back and forth about what type of people or what type of crowds they were trying to discourage from coming into these cafes, which is just really awful to think about. But let's just say that is not the direction that we're going in. There are lots of regular customers who I would see, a few times a day. They'd go on a 5 a.m. run, stop into the cafe to get a cup of water before they went home and showered and got dressed, and then came back inevitably to get their coffee. I now have to tell this person, who I know is going to make a purchase at some point today, that they cannot have this cup of water that they've been getting for the last 10 years. Like, what are we what are we doing? Like, what is the point of this other than to put workers in a very potentially dangerous situation? Maybe this customer is just annoyed and they're still going to come back, but maybe the person I'm telling that they can't use the bathroom is not going to respond in that way. And so not only am I putting myself possibly at risk and my fellow coworkers at risk, but I'm also taking time away from the floor where I could be helping the customers who are making a purchase to have this conversation with somebody, as opposed to just, letting them use the restroom or giving them a cup of water. That was one. For me, on top of rolling these out, they also pulled workers out to do trainings, like paid trainings, to teach us how to tell customers they could no longer use the bathroom and no longer have a cup of water. So that right there is, millions of dollars of training to train us how to do these things.
Instead of agreeing to a fair contract, we should add.
Instead of agreeing to a fair contract. Yes, yeah. We are, we just hit the 4-year anniversary of the store that I worked at filing our union petition, and we're still without a contract. So resources just going to the wrong place. The other very, very unnecessary policy change was a more restrictive dress code. So actually a regressive dress code, as opposed to what we were. And again, not entirely certain why, like all of a sudden baristas have, can only wear a black shirt, and their jeans have to be, within this color frame of wash. And there's all of these different things happening. And what it's leading to is, because it's being enforced irregularly. Workers are being sent home because they show up and they're wearing the wrong shade of black. Like just the most ridiculous things. So now these stores that have been notoriously understaffed for, at this point, years, are that much more understaffed because somebody is coming in trying to do the right thing, thinking they're showing up in dress code, even though it's ridiculous. And then their manager is like, sorry, you're going to have to go home and change if you want to come back and work. So you're cutting back on staff that's already pretty thin. That was one of the other policies that we saw. And of course, the one that I think is probably the most controversial is this new back to writing on cups with Sharpies. If you stepped into a Starbucks anytime in the 2010s, you would see the barista at the register with their Sharpie, and you would place your order, and they would mark your cup, and they would say, "Can I have your name?" And they put your name on the cup. And, that was the purpose of the marking cups and the purpose of the Sharpies. Right around 2015, we replaced Sharpies with printers. We would put everything in, including your name still, and it would print out on a sticker and it would be put on the cup. And I remember thinking, wow, Sharpie, like 3M is probably going to take a hit. Like we were going through so many Sharpies a week that this is probably going to cause something. But, that kind of just went away. And it was a little bit sad to see something like that go. But considering the volume of orders, it was kind of a necessary progression. So in walks Brian, and he's like, we're going to write on cups again, but we're not going to put your name, and we're not going to have it be the person at the point of sale where it makes the most sense. We're going to make it so that the barista who's responsible for producing your beverages, like on bar, also has to stop in between every beverage and write an affirmation or a positive message on your cup. And it can't be the name. It can't just be writing the person's name. It has to be something, super. And that rolled out, and I was like, wow, this is interesting. It's going to create some problems. And, it initially rolled out with absolutely no guidelines. And that's, generally speaking, not great. It was fun for a minute, but not great.
No guidelines on the affirmations?
There was not initially, no. And then, now that has progressed into this very detailed disciplinary progressive track for writing on cups. So here's all the list of things you can't do. Here's what you can't write. Here's the categories you have to avoid. But you still need to do this on every single cup, or you could get disciplined for it. And you still have to maintain getting these beverages out as quickly as possible. So these are the things just since he stepped in that workers are dealing with. And there's nothing that he has implemented that has made workers' jobs any easier. What the union is demanding. I think the last time I spoke to you all was December of last year when we were in the middle of bargaining. It was actually what ended up being our final bargaining session of that period. And we were incredibly hopeful. We had spent 9 pretty productive, solid months going back and forth with the company. We had reached some tentative agreements on some really substantial, significant non-economic proposals. And we were waiting for a response to our economic package. And I was hopeful, like the company had really sort of turned the other cheek a few months prior and had seemed committed to this, what they called this new path forward, to work on this foundational framework for contract language. And again, they're a multi-billion-dollar corporation. So we didn't think that we were going to have such an issue solving the economic problems, but we did. They showed up with a response to our package, which offered 0 financial improvement in the first year of the contract, and then only a 1.5% raise for the remainder years of the contract. Just literally pennies, like actually pennies. And so we couldn't accept that. It led to our largest action on in the campaign's history, which was 5,000 Starbucks baristas on strike through Christmas Eve of last year. And then the company kind of came back and said, okay, well, we'll enter into some mediation. And we were like, okay, great, let's continue the conversations. And now, it's pretty clear. I think Lynn really hit the nail on the head in that op-ed that she wrote, that the mediation was was a delay tactic and kind of just to quiet things down while some financial reports on the company were put out there. And that showed no progress. So what we've been doing in the last year is just continuing to organizing like crazy. These policies have been very unpopular. So workers are realizing very quickly that the only way that we stand a chance within Starbucks is to organize and to get this contract. So we're 12,000 strong now and willing to do, we will do whatever it takes to get this contract and to finalize it and to hopefully improve conditions in these stores.
Two little remarks. One is that thing about the affirmation is literally almost like that the Office Space flare thing with Jennifer Aniston not having enough flare. Okay, that's just amazing how this corporate BS is still going on. And two, I mean, it's the fastest growing union campaign in modern history. The 12,000 workers joining since December 2021, since you guys kicked this off. And the stalling tactic, could you expand upon that a little bit? Because, right now, the Trump administration has gutted the National Labor Relations Board. So my anticipation is that this other companies are going to keep trying to stall because since he's gutted it, I don't think they can reach a quorum. And the government's on their side basically if they want to just play this out. It doesn't seem like there's going to be any enforcement on the federal level. So
unfortunately, at least when you get to the bargaining side of all of this, there's very little protections for the bargaining process, even under like a labor-friendly president. Our
Gotcha.
labor laws just don't protect once there's a lot to sort of govern and guidance the getting to the point of unionizing process, right. But there's not a whole lot to govern and guidance the actual securing the contract. And so, yes, what he is doing, what Trump is doing in office to the NLRB and all of those things, it's awful and it's terrifying, and it absolutely, could cause a lot of issues for folks that are attempting to get to the point of unionizing. But what has always secured a contract in this country has been the pressure that workers have put on companies around the bargaining process, outside of the bargaining room or outside of the table, as we would say. It's showing them that we have the power to do what it takes to force their hand to give us this contract. What is, I think, the most disappointing when we're dealing with Starbucks, and again, I keep going back to this sort of idealism that this is supposed to be a better company. Like, why are we having to fight this hard for things that they could easily afford to give us? I mean, on top of the $96 million that Brian made in the first 4 months of his employment, they spent $81 million on a 3-day managers conference in Vegas in June. And, privately, they said to the union, hey, let us just get through this training for our managers. We need to get through this manager training in Vegas, and then we'll get back to talking about the contract. And we were like, okay, handle your business, and then we definitely want to talk to you. And it ended up being this, multi-million-dollar, I'll keep using the word conference in, quotations because that's what they're calling it. But, you have performers like Bruno Mars and Janelle Monáe, and like they're giving swag bags, and, all of the managers were flown in from their various stores. And guess who was running the stores for the week? The baristas, who you don't want to give enough respect to make sure that they have a living wage or enough hours to access the benefits that you offer.
Well, they're also, they're creating a divide too among the workforce in a way, right? And create that's cheaper for them in terms of, and then setting the precedent of giving you guys a fair contract, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, our calculations are that they could settle the economic side of this contract with us, a multi-year, economic side of this contract with us for less than a day's worth of sales. Like less than a single day's worth of sales could settle this. and you end with labor peace, right? You don't have to worry about the fact that your workers are so unsettled that, we are going to have to take further action. So you get labor peace out of it. And hey, maybe you actually solve some of the issues that are taking place in these stores that are keeping customers away. Like we know that customers are still staying away from Starbucks. We have presented many, many, many options to the company to help solve some of the issues in these cafes. We run the cafes every day are run by these baristas. They know what it takes to solve some of the issues that are keeping the customers out of these stores. And we want to be a part of those conversations because, selfishly, it would help make our lives a lot easier if we could help with some of these policies that we have to enforce and enact every single day. But we don't want the company to fail. We would like the customers to come back. We're still here fighting because we want to make things better. Otherwise, what would the point of all of this be? So we're just, the ball is in their court. Like we've made a lot of offers. We've asked Brian himself to step into bargaining. He is, he's not responded, at least to the best of my knowledge.
Lastly, Leftist Rage writes in, I would love to know the best way I can support my Starbucks barista. Just boycott and stop buying there, or is there something more impactful as a customer? I love my baristas. What would be your recommendation, Michelle, for how our audience can help best support the baristas?
So, I mean, if you're a regular customer and you have those baristas that you love and you support, disappearing on them, I don't think is the right thing to do right now. What I will say is that we are committed to doing whatever it takes to finalize this contract. If we need to strike, if necessary, we will do that. We've already got commitments from thousands of allies who have agreed not to cross the picket line should we need to go on strike in the future. So I think just paying attention to what's going on. In the meantime, supporting your baristas. You just heard what the median income is for the average barista. So if you can afford to drop a couple dollars in that tip jar, please do. If you visit our website, starbucksworkersunited.org, there's a lot of information about our current actions, current drives. There's a link to make a donation to our Solidarity Fund, which would be used for, strike purposes should we need to go on strike. There's also a link to our merch shop, which has some really just like kick-ass.
I gotta get some of that.
Kick-ass merch designed by people on the campaign, union made, and those funds also go into that fund as well. And then if a call is made to not cross a picket line or to support in any way, just whatever your willingness is to do that, that would go an incredibly long way to helping us secure this first contract. We have there's only a few remaining demands. We need better hours. There are workers who want to access Starbucks's benefits and can't because there's no guarantee that they're even going to get the hours they need to access that. Better take-home pay, because we already know what that looks like, as had been illustrated. Right. And there's still hundreds of unresolved unfair labor practice charges that are just hanging in the air that the company has promised to resolve over a year ago. And there were just 125 new ones filed at the beginning of 2025. This is a company that shows it seems regressive right now with the way that it's treating its workers. And that's just not good for their brand. If even if you don't care about the workers at all, I hope that's not the case. Even if you don't care about the people who are responsible for creating the atmosphere that keeps the customers coming back day in and day out, you have to recognize that it looks really bad when you're continuing to violate U.S. labor law and pay the price tag that comes along with that. And I don't just mean, we know there's no fiscal
reputationally.
Yeah, reputationally. And, someone has to defend these charges. And that's you're paying tens of $millions to firms like Littler Mendelson to go in and repeatedly lose in court. That has to be something that needs to be recognized as not a good look. So yeah, just whatever you can do to support your baristas. We will be very public about whatever calls need to be made, but the the time is now.
One last question, because our audience really wants to help here. Out West writes in, question for the guests: are there ways non-Starbucks local coffee shop baristas could get in touch and resources about strategies to unionize their shops?
Yeah, I mean, you can reach out the same way, through our website. You don't have to be a Starbucks worker. We are organized under Workers United, which is a longstanding labor union in the country, and it's affiliated with SEIU. So both unions also have organized cafe coffee workers from different companies, and we would be happy to get you in contact with whomever you need to be in contact with for that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Michelle, a national leader of Starbucks Workers United, 15-year Starbucks barista veteran. Thanks so much for coming back on the show, and we'd love to have you back in a few months giving us an update, and appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.